Today on Outside the Box Reviews, we are taking a look at the NECA Universal Monsters Creature from the Black Lagoon. The Gillman is one of my favorite Universal monsters, so this was one of the releases I was most looking forward to. Granted, I've been excited about all of these Universal Monsters releases, I think, but Gillman's definitely got a special place in my heart. Although, I think that also means that I can be a little harsher judging how this figure came out just because it is one of my favorites. And on initial look, there are some things with this figure that are kind of odd to me. I think they made some interesting choices with how they went about making this. I don't know if all of this was NECA's decision or if it was Universal themselves kind of dictating some of these things. But we're going to go ahead and take a closer look at all of it and discuss it along the way. The Gillman comes with no real accessories. He does come with 4 pairs of hands and 3 heads. However, I think the hands are a major missed opportunity in terms of how they were sculpted, because really, there's not a whole lot of difference going on with 3 of the 4 sets. We'll start with this set. Here we have the claws kind of extended out. The hand is relatively flat top to bottom. So basically it's like his fingers are straight out and then spread apart. If we flip them over, we could see there is some nice patterning on the bottom as well. A little bit of color on there. We'll get to the color in a little bit here. And then with these, I think it's important to kind of show a profile so you can see how the top of the hand kind of has a slight curve to it, but not much. Here's the second pair of hands. A lot of the same detail. We got the webbing between the fingers, little bits of kind of copper going on the hands, the claws themselves in a bone color, scale detail up at the actual back of the hand. These have the distinction of having a similar spread finger pose, but the fingers arching slightly back on the hand. Flip them over, see similar detail there on the bottom as well. And then this one in profile, you could see that kind of reach back on the fingers. Third set, very similar again. The only difference is they are slightly clawed in, so they are scooping downward just a little bit. Same kind of detail here at the top, similar detail going on here at the bottom. Though I believe with this hand, you can see there is a little bit of slop on the bottom inside of the claws, particularly this claw here. All the other ones seem pretty good for the most part, but that one does have just a sloppier paint job on it. And that one in profile, you can see that more clawed shape. And our last set is the most unique of the bunch. This is more like the gesturing or swimming or even slashing claws. So the hands are a little more folded up, the fingers are in different poses, the webbing kind of goes along with it, so it gives it a nice, cool, organic look. Honestly, they're my favorite hands of the set because they actually look like there's hands happening here and not just like flat paddles. There's the bottom side. You get a little more of a feel of how the webbing is kind of bending in between them, and it looks pretty darn good. And the profile view isn't quite as necessary here, but you can get the idea. There's definitely a very different look with these. My complaint with the claws is really just that there's not a lot of variety going on here. Even the really kind of clawed in hands don't match that kind of scooping shape that Rico Browning has that's kind of classic of his swimming stuff. So I really just feel like they could have given us 2 of the sets of spread finger hands and then something more swimming pose-esque, and then these claws that I have on them here, the more gesturing ones. Before we get into head sculpts, I did want to talk about the overall color scheme on this figure. Over the years, we've seen a lot of different color schemes given with Creature from the Black Lagoon figures and merchandise and everything. This figure appears to be based off of the Life magazine photos. These were photos that were taken, I believe, after the first movie was completed. They never actually made it into Life magazine, but they've been posted online for years and years. And I believe the color versions that are floating around are colorized, not color photos. So I say that because I'm not entirely sure these are the correct colors of the actual suit, but this has kind of become the modern official colors that Universal seems to subscribe to for the creature. So I'm guessing some of this may be Universal mandated in terms of the color scheme. I believe that's been true with other releases as well. And I say that because, well, this is not my favorite color scheme for the Gillman. Honestly, I kind of prefer like the older Diamond Select color scheme, like the original Diamond Select version of the creature, where he's more of a more vibrant bright green with a lot more bright yellow on him, including his chest plate. I also prefer the eyes yellow on him as opposed to the blue that we're getting here. So I don't know if this is necessarily NECA's fault, but it would be kind of cool to have a different variant of the creature down the road that has kind of the older official colorway as opposed to this modern version. And it's weird to say modern version when I'm talking about a movie from the 50s. But anyway, let's dive into the head sculpts. We get 3 of them. The first one here is a closed mouth. As mentioned before, he's got the kind of bluish eyes with the dark centers, so they're kind of like goggles basically. The skin is a relatively dark green. There are kind of copper highlights throughout it, and we really see that the most when we turn them to the side and take a look at the gills themselves. They have a nice kind of dry brushed coppery brown on there. There's some good wrinkles and everything going around the mouth. Around the back of the head, the color scheme gets darker. There's even kind of some darker green in there. We kind of have the gills converging from either side into the beginning of the dorsal fin going down the back, or the dorsal spine, whatever you want to call it. There's a look at his other side. Similar detail there, same kind of paint on the gills and all the wrinkles and everything. You see he's got all the kind of little warts and everything going on his chin too. Overall, not a bad head sculpt. And we talked about little variety with the hands. Not a whole lot different between the different head sculpts here too. So we have a partly opened mouth here. Once again, similar idea. We got the red lips on him, all the wrinkles are on the face, the bluish eyes with the black centers. See that same wrinkle detail going on the side, the same kind of copper dry brushing on the gills. Nothing else really different going on in the back. I should mention I do like that they kind of made the gills almost look like it's a helmet kind of thing. So it almost looks like there's a secondary layer underneath there, but it's all part of the same thing before it goes down to the actual neck area. And then more of the same on the other side. Honestly, this is the head I'm going to probably use the most because I feel like it is the most Gillman looking of the three of them. In the movie, he kind of opens and closes his mouth a lot, so to me it just makes sense to kind of have the middle look to blend between the two extremes. And here's the one with the mouth wide open. We can kind of see the tongue going on in there as well. I don't know. This one just seems dopier than the other two. I just don't really foresee using it all that often. But there's a look from the one side, from the back, and from the other side. The heads really cover up most of the neck peg, so I'm just going to leave the head off for a moment to look at that. Nothing crazy going on. Like I said, you really can't see much of it anyway. But there's some wrinkles going across the throat. And then on the back, there's a tiny little section of that dorsal fin popping out. Same coloration as everything else, the kind of copper color. And this part you could see more just because the head does kind of pull up at that point. But the throat really does get covered up by the head. For the Gillman's chest, you can kind of see almost the way the suit goes together. There's like kind of a rectangular area coming down off his neck, like it was the mask laid over top of the actual body of the Gillman suit. So there's kind of a very noticeable ridge there, but the textures do blend out a little bit. There's kind of the shoulder pads going on, little spikes coming off of those, the kind of pimply, pebbly texture of the upper chest. This is using that same dark green plastic that we saw in the head, with a copper-ish dry brushing going over top of it. We get into the stomach area, and this is that same kind of dark plastic. There is a bit of a lighter highlight on it in the middle, but it is dark. And like I said, I just really like the look of the yellow belly on him, so it's a bit disappointing to have this. I think it just kind of makes him look more muted and everything, which is probably more realistic, but just not my preference. The sculpting here is still good. This is a soft rubber piece going through the middle. What you're seeing here is actually 3 separate sections. There's a part connected to his upper torso, there is a mid-joint, and then there is the kind of pelvis diaper area. And while they do misalign as you articulate him, I think they actually blend pretty well here. And if you look at the photos of the suit, this area obviously crumpled a lot as the actor moved inside of it, so I don't think it's too bad if these sections look a little weird. They actually still end up looking more realistic than the actual suit did for how bendy it was. For the arm, we continue on that pebbly texture. The scales on the arm are almost built like armor, where there's like sections that are gradually getting bigger as you go up the arm that kind of fit into one another. And then the bottom of each of those kind of has a touch of that copper color. With a bit of fin coming off the back of his forearm. Again, another area that I'm more used to seeing in a brighter yellow. And then being green here, that same dark green with kind of a yellowish dry brushing over top of it, I think is a bit lackluster when it comes to how everything looks. The area I meant to come back to with the hands that I forgot to is that this is one area where it does divert from the Life magazine photos a fair bit. In the Life magazine photos, he has a very heavy copper, like almost pads on the bottom of his hands. And while there is a bit of that copper coloring on the bottom of all these hands, it's still done more as like a dry brushing effect. And it's not as kind of structured as it is in the Life magazine photos. Spinning around to the back, similar idea, the kind of armor look, where every layer is kind of bigger than the one below it, and it kind of tapers down. More of that pebbly texture, more of that copper coloring. Here we can see a lot more of that dorsal fin, and the paint is better here. It is a much heavier yellow than they used on the arms, but still it does have that green base and doesn't look as vibrant as I would like it to. Sticking with the spine and the back of the figure, it comes down to his butt and then splits onto the top of both legs, going down to about the knee ditch. I feel like we lose more of that copper yellow coloration as we come down to this split, and it's pretty just green here, which is disappointing. But continue on that pebble texture again. On the front, we can see a little bit more of that pelvis area where the belly plate sits, and then more of that armor look coming down the legs, and a lot more of that copper coloring as well. And the lower legs, kind of the boots of the costume, you lose pretty much all of that copper coloring. There's little bits and pieces of it, but you lose a lot of it. The sculpt is still there, it just isn't as brightly colored. The feet have a little bit more of it. We have the bone-colored claws coming out of it. And on the back, we have a little bit of the fin coming out of the calf. Once again, the more lazy paint job on it, and kind of that heel spur that they have on the foot. And there is some detailing on the bottom of the foot, but not very much, and then we do have peg holes. Speaking of the feet, I would have honestly liked to see, instead of one pair of hands, I would give that up for an additional pair of feet, or even just the one foot, really. There is a scene in the movie where he gets caught in a net and loses one of his toe claws, and it's actually a bit of consistency they have throughout the film going forward, is that he's missing a toe claw, so I think it would be kind of fun to have a version of him without that. Honestly, kind of considering buying one and cutting one of the toe claws off and just making my own custom out of it. For articulation, he has 2 ball joints in the head, one at the base of the neck and then one going into the head itself. So we get a decent side-to-side motion. We can rotate, and we can pivot side to side. The only downside is because he has that center spine here, you can't get him looking all the way up. He looks a decent amount up, but not as much as I would like. I kind of wish they would have done these heads like they did the original Universal Monsters releases, where the head and neck joint were all one piece. And maybe they could have given us one that was missing that dorsal fin bit on the neck part so we could look a little further up for swimming poses. The arms will do a full 360. They will go out to the side pretty far, past 90 degrees. And then they tuck in, not quite all the way to the body, but pretty close. We have a double jointed elbow, which is a great use of a double jointed elbow. It bends in pretty darn far and looks pretty good. It's a little boxy when you bend it all the way in, but for most poses, I think it's going to look really good. We can also rotate at that elbow joint, which is great. All the hands will rotate as well as hinge up and down. At the torso, we have an upper joint that will go a little bit back, hindered, of course, by the fins. It will bend decently forward. It will rotate side to side as well as pivot. Similar at the waist here. Not a lot of movement forward and back there either. We can get some rotation, and then as well you could pivot there. The legs will go decently forward considering how bulky the legs on this figure are and how bulky the diaper area is. Not super far back because of all the fins and everything. It will go relatively far out to the side, just shy of 90 degrees. And then we can rotate just a little bit at the upper leg. The knee has a double joint, so it will bend pretty far back. One of the cool things they did with this sculpt is the knee will actually kind of go up into the upper leg and hide a lot of that going on. So it kind of looks like a single jointed leg until you bend it all the way, which is, I think, kind of cool in keeping it a clean look. We can also rotate at the knee, and then the ankle will bend up, it will bend down, and it will pivot. It also swivels side to side. Not as much articulation up and down as I would have liked out of it. I wish you had a little more range there, but that's what we got. For a size comparison, here's the NECA version in the middle with the Diamond Select second version there on the left. This is the more articulated version, not the figure that was kind of more of a statue. That was the original release. And then the Jada Toys one on the right, which is a somewhat newer version, but it's been out for, I think, a year or two now at this point. Obviously, we knew the Jada Toys one was going to be smaller. It's just built on a different scale. But I'm honestly surprised the Diamond one is shorter. Most of these Diamond Select 2.0 figures are just massive and have been dwarfing their NECA counterparts. But for once, they actually lose the height battle. I will say, however, this Diamond one, and even bits of the Jada one, I like the green overall more. I like that they used kind of a darker green as the contrast color versus the copper. And I like, even though it's inconsistent and not so bright, they have a brighter yellow on some of the webbing and stuff. Definitely the Diamond, but even some of the Jada has it going on the webbing between the fingers, which I think could have added some nice contrast as well. And then to swap in, not even really a good comparison point, but this is the Bendy Figs, I think is the brand name. Creature from the Black Lagoon. I just try to grab everything Gillman I can, usually, so this was kind of an impulse buy when I saw it at a store. Can't even compare the color at all because this thing's mostly one color, but it's definitely also shorter than the other two releases. And then our usual comparisons, Frankenstein's monster from NECA on the right, and my stand-in scientist of Doc Brown there on the left. I think height-wise this works out pretty well. I believe this version of the figure, since it's based on the Life magazine photos, I'm assuming this is more like the Ben Chapman version of the creature. And I know he was a big dude, so that definitely kind of fits height-wise here, so I think that works pretty well. As I said before, with the Gillman being one of my favorite Universal monsters, I think I could potentially be a little overly harsh with this figure, but I do think NECA picked, or was assigned, a much less interesting color scheme they could have gone with. I think they really should have done a swimming head instead of just showing the mouth in 3 different positions. I really think we should have gotten a different foot for that one change that the character goes through throughout the movie. And a lot of different Creature from the Black Lagoon releases, we get stuff like the spear gun or the fossilized hand or anything, honestly, just to theme this thing out. Maybe something from the boat. And we get none of that here. And with how cool and in-depth NECA's gone with accessories on their other Universal monsters, it just leaves this one feeling a lot flatter than some of its counterparts. And while maybe some of the other options aren't as obvious with the creature, they're there. There are things you could do to make this thing look cooler and have cooler accessories and stuff like that, and they didn't go that route. And honestly, I just wish this damn thing was painted better. I think the lack of painting, especially on the fins, on his wrists, shins, and back, just really show a lack of care in this figure. In terms of the sculpt, in terms of the articulation, I think they did a good job with it. I just think it could have been so much cooler, and they didn't take it to its fullest conclusion. That being said, it probably is the best Creature from the Black Lagoon figure ever made at this scale. It's just far from the greatest Universal Monsters figure NECA's done even in this past year. However, because I am an obsessive fan with this crap, I would still like to see if they ever got around to doing the slightly retooled version that is in Revenge of the Creature. I believe it's mostly a change to the head sculpt with a little bit of a point coming up in the back of the head. Beyond that, I think it's a relatively similar suit. We know NECA likes their repaints and retools, so I don't think that would be too hard to accomplish. So I'm still going to recommend this figure, it's just not as wholehearted of a recommend as I really would have liked. I forget what exactly is officially next from NECA. I think it's the Nosferatu figure, which is interesting seeing as we're also getting a Super 7 one in the same scale around the same time. The one I'm really waiting for is that Bride of Frankenstein Karloff figure coming out with the more burnt look and everything. I think that could be a pretty cool release, even if it is somewhat of a retool as well. But yeah, that does it for this review, and I'll be back soon with another one. Later.